very special move, and that is really the only time when two pieces move together at once, and it's called castling. Now, Sung, can you tell us what castling is?
Castling means when the king and the rook swap with each other to get the king in a safer place, away from the danger.
Okay, and how do you castle? What's the way to do it?
Well, when you castle, whichever way you castle, you move the king 2 squares. And the rook always next to it. And when you castle the long side, you always move your king 2 squares and the rook here next to the king.
Now, what happens if there are any pieces in between? What happens if there is a queen there? Would it still be possible to castle over there?
Then it won't be possible to castle, because to castle you need a free way for the king and the rook to move together.
And why castle in the first place? What's the purpose of doing it?
The purpose of castling is to get your king in a safer position, away from the danger, so that the game won't end so quickly.
So it's a very, very good idea to castle early in the opening, in the vast majority of cases. As you know, chess has lots of rules, but then there are lots of exceptions. But when it comes to the king, generally, if you keep it in the middle of the board, it's going to be exposed over there. It is going to be much easier to attack the king if it's right there in the middle than if it has castled. And the way to castle, so just to recap, you move 2 squares to the right, and the rook goes over. That's the way to do the kingside castling, because this part of the board is called kingside. And to do the queenside castling, you again move by 2 squares, this time 2 squares to the left, and the rook goes over. So that's the way to connect the rooks, that's the way to put the king in safety. Now there are a few more rules that you have to keep in mind when you are thinking about castling. First of all, you need to clear the pieces out. This, by the way, would not be a position that is possible in chess, because this bishop would have this bishop on f1 would need a way to get out. So on move 1, if you move the pawn out, you might then follow up by bringing your knight out. You can then follow up by bringing your bishop out. And in a position like this, you would be 100% ready to castle. King to the right by 2 squares, and the rook coming across. This king here would be considerably safer than if it is stuck in the middle. Few rules that you have to keep in mind when you're castling. Now, I'm just going to remove a couple of pieces to make it easier to see what is going on. Okay, if you had a situation like this, with white to move, would it be possible to castle? Would it be possible to castle?
No, because when the king castles, it would be in direct check.
That's right, because the bishop is controlling the square g1. Here it would really be impossible to castle. How about castling over there?
Yep, it is possible.
That
because
would be
nothing
very much possible.
is in its way, and it's not going to go through check.
Yes, so in this case you can castle queenside, but you cannot castle kingside. What if black had a bishop over here on g4? Could you still castle queenside?
Some of you may think it's possible because it's not landed in a check, but no, it's not possible because the bishop is cutting off the way to castling.
Yes, well, this king cannot really castle either kingside because it would go into the check, or queenside because it would go over the square that black controls. So it's really, really important to know when is it that you can and when is it that you cannot castle. What happens if black gives white a check? Check is given. Can you now just simply castle to get out of that check?
Whenever a king is in a check, it's not possible for the king to castle.
That's right. Well, so if there is a check, you can't castle. You have to do something about that check because the king cannot remain in check. So if you can take a piece, that's good. If you can put something in the way, that's also good. Otherwise, you will have to run away with your king to get out of check, but you cannot castle. It is not impossible to castle. Another very important rule to keep in mind is what happens if your king makes a move? So let's say black gives you a check, you move the king, black goes back, you go back, black develops a piece, and then you say, well, fine, my king is not in check, so I'm going to castle. Would that be possible?
No. Once your king moves, that's it. The king can't castle again.
What about if you move the rook?
Well, if a rook moves here and back, it's not possible for the king to castle this side anymore because the rook moved. But it is possible for the king to castle the king side, but not yet because of this bishop.
That's right. So if you move the rook and then put it back, you have lost the right to castle on that part of the board, on that side. But if the bishop moves out of the way, well, it would now be possible to castle king side. So if you move this rook, you can no longer castle over there, but this rook hasn't moved, which would make castling king side perfectly possible. And this is what the castling is